Today, we're diving into a really important piece of legislation that completely changed the game for millions of people in India, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. So let's get right into what makes it such a big deal.
This wasn't just some minor update. It was a massive overhaul, a seismic shift. The goal was to bring India's laws in line with global standards, and really to build a more inclusive society for everyone.
So what does this law actually do on the ground? Well, that's what we're here to break down. We're going to look at who it protects, what rights it guarantees, and crucially, how it's all enforced.
To really get this law, we first have to understand the philosophy behind it. It represents a totally new way of thinking about disability. Okay, so this 2016 Act replaced an older one from 1995, and the change in thinking is huge. The old Act was based on a welfare model, kind of like thinking of support as charity, but this new Act, it's a rights-based model. And that means support isn't a gift, it's an entitlement, something you're owed based on equality and human dignity. So why the big change? Well, a major reason was to fulfill India's commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This law made good on that promise. It also embraced a more modern, flexible idea of disability, recognizing that our understanding of these things has to change and grow over time.
This brings us to a super important question. Who exactly does this more inclusive act cover? The answer is probably one of its most significant changes. Under the old law from 1995, the government only officially recognized, get this, just 7 specific types of disabilities.
The 2016 Act completely blew that number out of the water. It jumped from 7 all the way to 21. That is a massive leap forward. It tripled the number of recognized conditions, bringing so many more people under the law's protection for the very first time. And this expansion cast a much wider net. It now includes conditions like autism spectrum disorder, specific learning disabilities, and blood disorders like sickle cell disease. It also explicitly covers acid attack victims and people with dwarfism.
Now, you're going to see this term a lot in the law. Benchmark disability. This is a key legal definition. To qualify, a person has to be certified as having at least 40% of one of those 21 disabilities. Think of this certification as the key that unlocks many of the specific benefits and reservations we're about to talk about.
So having a benchmark disability opens up a whole set of rights and entitlements. Let's dig into what those are.
This one is just so powerful and non-negotiable. The Act guarantees free education for every single child with a benchmark disability between the ages of 6 and 18. It's a fundamental promise of inclusion right from the very beginning.
The Act also turns these rights into real-world opportunities through reservations. The whole idea is to ensure representation and access. So, as you can see, at least 4% of government jobs are reserved, along with 5% of seats in higher education and 5% of slots in poverty alleviation schemes. And it doesn't stop with quotas. The Act pushes for inclusive education in government-funded schools and demands accessibility in all public buildings. We're talking both government and private, within a specific timeline. There are even provisions for things like land allocation, all aimed at weaving people with disabilities into the very fabric of public life. Of course, rights on paper don't mean much without a system to actually implement them and hold people accountable. So the Act created that system from the ground up. A whole new structure of authorities was set up to enforce this law. At the top, you've got central and state advisory boards that make the policies. Then you have chief and state commissioners who are like watchdogs, monitoring how things are going and handling complaints. And right down at the local level, district-level committees are there to tackle concerns in the community. And to back all of this up with actual resources, the Act called for the creation of national and state funds. This financial support is absolutely critical for helping people with disabilities and for funding all the initiatives in the law.
The Act also brings the idea of guardianship into the 21st century. Instead of a guardian having total control, the law pushes for a system of joint decision-making. It's all about respecting the autonomy and ability of the person with the disability as much as possible.
Okay, so the Act sets up rights and a support system. But what about accountability? Let's look at what happens when the law is actually broken.
Yeah, this law isn't just a set of nice suggestions. It has real teeth. It lays out very specific penalties to make sure people comply and to protect individuals from discrimination.
For anyone who breaks the rules in this Act, there's a clear, escalating scale of penalties. A first-time offense could mean a fine of up to 10,000 rupees and maybe even 6 months in jail. But for any offense after that, it jumps up significantly, up to 2 years in jail and a fine that can go all the way up to 5 lakh rupees. And the law gets even tougher for crimes that specifically target people with disabilities. If someone intentionally insults, intimidates, or exploits a person with a disability, they're looking at a minimum of 6 months in prison, which could go up to 5 years, plus a fine.
To handle these kinds of cases, the Act provides 2 main pathways to justice. First, special courts are supposed to be set up in each district to make sure trials are speedy. And second, as we mentioned earlier, those chief and state commissioners also act as a place to go to get your grievances heard.
So look, the 2016 Act is an incredibly powerful legal framework. It defines the rights, it sets up the support systems, and it lays out the penalties. But a law can only provide the rules. The bigger question, the one that we all have to think about, is this. How do we build a culture where respecting these rights isn't just a legal requirement, but a social reality?